All right, everybody. Hello, welcome back. So this is your part 2 of your week 6 lesson on chapters 11 and 12. So in part 1, we looked at chapter 11 on empowerment. What we're going to do now is switch gears a little bit and talk about chapter 12 of your textbook on community and social change. So, in community psychology, no surprises, we are very concerned with creating positive changes in societies that will, help people to live healthier lives. So, this is really what we are all about. Now, there are a number of different strategies that we study in community psychology that are different ways for us to achieve the kinds of social change that we're interested in. So what we're going to do is go through each of these different organizing strategies for achieving social change, and we're going to look at a few different case studies of real organizations that would fit into each one of these different strategies that are doing very amazing work in our society. So the first one that you're seeing here, a community coalition. So a coalition is just, a more formal group of people who come together, and they're coming together to address some sort of a community problem. Now, this is usually happening at the organizational level. If you think back to Bronfenbrenner's ecological levels of analysis, that's kind of where this is happening. Although we would consider a community coalition an organization, but what they're doing is they're working very closely with a locality. So they kind of go together. This is an example of a really interesting community coalition that was developed in Ontario Healthy Communities Coalition. Their mandate is to create innovative solutions to meet community challenges and build strong, equitable, sustainable communities through engagement, education, and collaboration. So this one has been around for quite a while now, since 1992, and it's done a lot of really interesting and amazing work. The second one you're seeing, consciousness raising. So consciousness raising, what the goal of this is to improve people's awareness of a social issue, because of course we can't possibly work to change a community or social issue unless people know about it, right? So raising awareness is a very important part of creating social change. Now, you may have seen, people walking around with the red ribbons for AIDS awareness, or the pink ribbons for breast cancer awareness, for example. These are the kinds of symbols that we might, take on for our own lives to help demonstrate awareness of a particular social issue. Consciousness raising or raising awareness is often not seen as the social action itself. It's often seen as a precursor to other action, because what we want to do is improve people's understanding and energize people to improve participation. Social action, direct social action, is another really interesting way that we can achieve social change. This is more of kind of like a grassroots organization, our G20 protest, for example, that kind of thing, where people will show up and demonstrate in the streets, right? Exercise their right to protest as a democracy, that they do not agree with something that is happening in their society. So oftentimes that's the way that social action will develop. Now, social action, one of some of the famous examples of really powerful social action are things like the March on Washington in the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, we recently had the Women's March, if anybody participated in that. So some really interesting examples of social action. And what these things do is, when thousands and thousands of people come out and show how angry they are about something, that's a really powerful way for us to, demonstrate to a government, for example, that something that's happening is not okay. And oftentimes, sometimes, a government will actually listen. So interesting stuff there. Now, the Council of Canadians is a group of people who do a lot of social action projects within Canada. They were founded a little more than 30 years ago in 1985, and they have spread over 60 chapters in the country. Some of you might be familiar with one of their leaders, Maud Barlow, who's a very famous Canadian who's doing incredible work on, water security, clean water security in particular. So the Council of Canadians is a really interesting illustration of social action in Canada. All right, another example of how we can achieve social change is through different kinds of community development initiatives. So what a community development initiative would try to do is build community resources so that a community has the ability to be sustainable, to be self-sufficient, for example. So it could include something like economic development, political development. It could include things like improving the physical environment. This is, your kind of classic going abroad and building schools, for example, so kind of more bricks and mortar approaches to community development by contributing a very important resource to a community like a school or a hospital. So that's a really interesting approach that we have to social change. We also are very interested in alternative settings in community psychology, which, we kind of contrast with what we would consider like a mainstream setting. So an alternative setting is going to be something like a mutual help organization, that kind of thing. That's going to be slightly outside of the mainstream, but could still make a very meaningful impact in somebody's life. Sometimes these can be difficult to sustain because they do exist kind of outside of the mainstream. And so, we sometimes find that funding gets cut and the grants don't, follow through as much as we were hoping for. But this is another really interesting method that we can achieve social change through in community psychology. So another example or case study of what we would consider an alternative setting would be the Center for Social Innovation in Toronto. Really interesting organization. What they do here is they've created shared workspaces for people or organizations that have a social mission associated with what they do. So I'm just going to read their mission here. To catalyze social innovation and foster collaboration by connecting social innovators and entrepreneurs working across sectors and providing them with programming such as workshops, seminars, competitions, and mentorship opportunities to accelerate their success. So there are at the moment, I believe, 2 physical, humongous buildings in Toronto that the Center for Social Innovation operates. And if you are a person or an organization with a social mission, so some sort of a mission to improve the social circumstances or quality of life of the clients that you serve or the community that you serve, you can apply for a desk space at this building, and they charge reasonable rent for the desk space because what we know is that being a member of the not-for-profit sector in our society, one of the challenges that people often experience is finding a place to work. Because if any of you have any experience with, renting a building, for example, we know that office space is generally speaking very expensive to rent. So this is one of the ways that the Center for Social Innovation, makes these kinds of resources more accessible to organizations that might not otherwise be able to afford things like that. Really, really interesting stuff. Seems so simple and straightforward, right? But it's a very powerful thing that they have done. And basically what it allows people to do is do their work better, essentially, right? They don't have to worry about having a place to work or bills and things like that, right? That our community change agents don't want to have to worry about, right? They want to do good work in the community. So really neat stuff that the Center for Social Innovation is doing in Toronto. In community psychology, we're always trying to adapt to the new types of technologies that are available to us. And so over the past years, we've seen, the use of the internet and social media being used as a tool for connection and communication, as a way for creating social change. We might use these kinds of tools to crowdsource, for example. So some really interesting things there. Basically, when it comes to some of the different approaches that we look at for community change, a few different things that I want you to look at. So I'll get you to spend a little bit more time reviewing these on your own, but I just want to highlight the bottom-up approach, where community members are able to demonstrate a certain amount of control of the change efforts. So we find that that can have a really big impact. We also find that, when community change initiatives are most effective, we find that they're addressing multiple areas of action. So they're taking a comprehensive approach to solving a social issue. So if the social issue is crime, right, they're not just dealing with, decreasing theft rates in a community, right? They're taking a multi-pronged, comprehensive approach that is going to be actually looking at the root causes of this particular social issue. Especially what we try to do is develop external linkages, resources, etc. We also find that effective community change initiatives, they draw on legitimate social science and research data to give evidence for their strategies and approaches. They are delivered with what we would call effective intensity, which you looked at in our last unit, which has to do with one of these issues of implementing a program. And they're often initiated from a long-term perspective, right? That we know that decreasing crime rates is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to take a long-term commitment. In community psychology, we're also really interested in public policy as a way that we can improve social change. And one of the really interesting public policies that has been initiated in London, Ontario, that you've heard me talk a little bit already about, is the concept of housing first. So housing first has been adopted as an official policy within the London municipal government. And what they're doing is a new initiative to improve access to affordable housing for people who are living in homelessness. So this is an approach that was taken on by the City of London as an official policy. And because of that, it's creating very real social change and impact for people's lives. The last element of social change that we look at is consultation. So this is what a number of my colleagues in community psychology do. They work as consultants, where they will work with different organizations, do research, make recommendations and changes in an organization's practice. to help improve their processes. So that's another really interesting thing that we do in community psychology. All right, so quick run through with your chapter 12 material, right? These are some of the different tools that we use to achieve social change in our society. Very interesting and important concepts for us in community psych. Great work, guys. That's the end of this